So I was a co-founder of Heresies, and one of the issues that I worked on was the ecology issue, with Mount St. Helens blasting off on the cover as a metaphor for the somewhat controversial connection between women and nature. Ecology is about the interrelationships between organisms, and humans are all too much important a part of that equation, given our power for destruction and our power for creation. The one on the left is by Anne Noggle. It's called Stonehenge Decoded. And the one on the right is one of Mary Beth Edelson's Iceland pieces. She concentrated on the goddess for many years. There's a lot of talk about listening to the river and listening to the trees and listening to our inner selves. We also need to listen to people. If you listen well, you might get lucky and hear it told like it is. Women are socially conditioned to be better at this, and we might as well run with it instead of theorizing ourselves into denial. I'm not sure I care whether it's for reasons of nature or nurture that so many eco-artists are female. I have no trouble with the allegedly essentialist notion that caretaking and rehabilitation has long been women's work. Therefore, some women are particularly attracted to environmentalism, although I no longer try to pinpoint stylistic and formal differences. In the 30 years since some of us were really pretty obsessed by what was then the visible differences between men and women's work, an integration has taken place, as came up in one of the earlier panels, though hopefully not a co-optation. The one on the left is by Andrea Poli. It's a climate change piece she did at the North Pole, or partly. The one on the right is by Yves-André Laramé. This was an insert in the local paper in this show I'm going to talk about. I'm going to switch gears now and end with the application of some of these ideas and women artists' roles in the biggest issue we've had yet to confront. It's been said that survival is the only modern topic. In 2007, I curated, which by the way means caring for, a show on climate change. It was called Weather Report, and it included 29 women, 12 men, and 10 mixed collaborations. The predominance of women was probably chalked up to my feminism, but I didn't even count until I'd made all the selections. And the results only reinforced my long-standing view that women were simply more likely to make effective public art, to go out of their way to communicate and collaborate with their audiences, and to advocate for what we call nature through participatory and public eco-art, a significant stronghold of feminist art where women's mythic identification with nature has found a lot of new outlets. Weather Report was a huge exhibition with 51 artists or collaborative teams. Meryl Euclides was in it, among others, and 17 works in the public domain throughout the city of Boulder, Colorado. It combined political, public, and activist art. I'll show you a few pieces, just literally the tip of the iceberg, but it's something I'd like to leave you thinking about. Actually, these are old pieces. These aren't from the show. The one on the left is by Joyce Cutler Shaw. In 1982, there was a huge anti-nuclear march in New York, the biggest march. I mean, it was something like 1 million people. And both these slides are from that. Joyce had in front of the UN, with waters that she'd collected from all over the world, people had sent her all these different little things of water. She'd made an ice sculpture called Survival, and it was all the letters. I couldn't find the original one, so we just get the but it was a fascinating piece, and you could sit there and watch Survival melting away in front of your very eyes. And the one on the right is the Sisters of Survival, which was a women's building, LA women's building group. They were founded in New York, but a lot of the people involved started out at the LA women's building performance. So. Part of an activist artist's dilemma is that she's often trying to make culture, understood as positive, creative, life-giving, about the possibility of extinction or destruction. Quite naturally, we fear destroying ourselves at the same time. Environmental issues used to be considered soft politics. I felt that way myself at one point. Now they're central, on the edge of the abyss. Public interventions, community, and eco-art are all about claiming space for alternative value systems. Environmentalism, as I said, used to be a sort of political suburbia, but sparked by indisputable evidence of human agency and climate change, it's now the radical edge, but only if social justice is at its core. Sustainability doesn't mean greenwashing, doesn't mean sustaining the current global inequalities so that the comfortable can stay comfortable. This is a chance to rethink a lot more than our light bulbs. The one on the left is by Sheila de Bretteville. It's called Biddy Mason, Time and Place. It's about a woman who was enslaved and escaped to California and owned land and so forth. It's a public piece in California. The one on the right is The Lesbian Park Rangers, who are Shauna Dempsey and Laurie Millen, and they work out of Winnipeg, Canada. I couldn't find the funnier one, but anyway, they march around and they have little badges that say Lesbian Park Rangers. And they give people advice about the parks, and they go out in canoes and so forth. So a lot of the most interesting public art is, in a sense, about gendered space. It's often done in series or long-term projects that may take years or even decades to complete, expanding our current notions of art in time. Feminist art has always been unique in its application of the principles of generosity to and reciprocity with the social structures from which it emerges. I think that's why much of the best public art is made by women with feminist consciousness. The distinction between working for the public and working for the market is an important one. If some women are gifted synthetists and mediators, and I don't see that as an insult, what better place to work on than that fluid membrane between public and private spheres, to quote Sheila de Bretteville, who did the piece on the left, who was a co-founder of the LA Women's Building and is now head of the design department at Yale, and a pioneer of notions of gendered spaces in public art. If it weren't for feminist models like de Bretteville, architect Susana Torre, who happened to be a heretic too, and writer Dolores Hayden, I probably wouldn't have spent the last 20 years writing on sort of neocultural geography, working on community planning and watershed restoration. The one on the left is from the Weather Report show. It's by Isabella Gonzalez, who happens to be a neighbor of mine in New Mexico, who did a piece in a credit union about the atmosphere being the size of a penny, the thickness of a penny. This is apparently sort of a vague description of it because some scientists said, no, it's not, it's this and that. But anyway, she used pennies and postcards to send into political powers that anybody could write and send in. And the one on the other side is a famous, much earlier piece from, I think, 1982, of Agnes Dennis's. It's called Wheatfield Confrontation. It was 2 acres of a wheat field planted and harvested in what now, of course, has a lot more loaded meanings to it, given its site. As a firm believer in the ecological truism that everything's connected, I can't imagine an issue more all-encompassing than climate change, or more challenging. Scientists warning us to pay attention have been accused of fear-mongering. But is it fear-mongering to yell, get off the tracks, a train is coming? And ultimately, what could be all that bad about scaring the world into sustainability of some kind? Sure, I'd rather see us change out of hope than fear, but this seems to be one of the last fragile moments when we have a choice. We can stop screwing everything up and contemplate better lives for all living organisms, even us. The very fact of climate change offers startling insights into our own lives, and so how could artists resist? This is both a piece on the left from Beverly Natus, who's sort of a culture jammer. It's one of a large series of advertisements that have to do with climate change. And the one on the right is a big piece that was in a public park by Sherry Wiggins from Colorado. It's called Carbon Portraits, and she had people famous people and not so famous people talking about their carbon footprints. Society produces nature, but artists should be able to produce new angles on seeing nature, which in turn could affect the way we treat what we consider the natural. There's no reason to exaggerate the elusive power of art. Artists can't change the world alone, but when they make a concerted effort, they can collaborate with life itself. Working with and between other disciplines and audiences, and given the chance to be seriously considered outside the rather narrow world of art, artists can offer visual jolts and subtle nudges to conventional knowledge. It was really exciting to watch the artists wrestling with this gigantic problem of climate change in so many different ways, each one moved by a very different aspect of what's coming down the pike, ranging from renewable energy sources and sustainable building, food production, wildlife migration and habitat restoration, suburban sprawl, government responsibility, water shortages, desertification, biological mutation, and the economic ramifications of our wasteful society, which had not yet become so apparent as it did a couple of years later. We no longer know what to expect from weather or climate, but artists are at home in the realm of the unexpected. They can work somewhere between the questions and the answers. They can make the hot breath of climate change both vivid and immediate, and deconstruct the ways we're manipulated by the powers that be. These are both by Helen Mayer and Newton Harrison. The one on the left is Peninsula Europe, and the one on the right was the piece in my show. It's called The Mountain in the Greenhouse. It's a projection of wildflowers being chased up a mountain by warming temperatures. And ecosystems, with their infinite sensitivity to change, describe climate zones by where they grow. So when flowers and their dependents reach the top, where are they going to go? And the Harrisons work in an interesting place, sort of between the questions and the answers, because they were the scientist they were working with was reluctant to speculate up to 100 years on the basis of his findings, but he was very happy to have the artist do it, because then he didn't get blamed for it, but he thought it was true. Their role then became conveyors of risky information coming from real science. These are both by Aviva Romani, of Trigger Points, Tipping Points. She works partly off of Vinyl Haven, Maine. A feminist who was also at the Women's Building, eco-artist, so forth. As a part of a long-term project, The Cities of If, she's generated conversations and GIS prints with Dr. Jim White of the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research to clarify the complex relationships between natural resources and built infrastructures that can be directly correlated with global warming, which is not really a phrase I like to use anymore. Climate change makes more, climate chaos makes more sense. As they hone in on restoration of degraded environments through trigger points in the landscape, they explore ways for artists and scientists to work together internationally. Patricia Johansson in the 60s began her pioneering buildings that grow and change, clean their own water, emerged with gardens modeled on natural forms, forming alliances with living systems in order, as she puts it, to subsume the hubris of ego and waste. The one on the left is Living Apartment Houses, is a drawing from the late 60s. The one on the right is a later piece from, I think, early 80s called Fair Park Lagoon in Dallas. They set her on a path, these projects, of lifelong engagement with public art, energy conservation, and sustainability, that elusive keyword for the Green Revolution. Let's see, do I? No, I didn't. I thought I had another thing of... She's kept on doing these huge environmental projects. There's one on the right is the Plugheads. They're from my hometown. And they were also in the show as a performance piece. There was a separate parade that happened after the opening of the show. Bobby Beasold is behind the Plugheads. And the one on the left is by Natasha Mayers, who lives in the very small town of Whitefield, Maine. And as a Three Little Indians piece demonstrated, the strongest activism in public art, especially those concerned with the environment, usually start from a very specific location, from consciously lived experience, and then it has to move out into a kind of ripple effect. For instance, this populist piece by Natasha was in the 2006 4th of July parade, and she always does these wonderful activist floats for her little town's parade and 4th of July. And they spoofed life in a transformed northern clime, skiing in bathing suits, LL Bean hot weather fashions carved out of parkas, snowplow drivers for the Kyoto Protocol, and politicians in togas fiddling while the world burns. Basha Ireland, who was raised in Boulder, developed another chapter in her ongoing A Gathering of Waters, which she's also executed with communities along the Rio Grande in Canada and England and elsewhere. This broadly collaborative project connects people along 47 miles of the Boulder Creek, drawing attention to the diminishing Arapahoe Glacier, source of the city's water, which has dropped over 100 feet since 1960. And this is a very long and complicated project, and I'm not going to take the time to detail it, but she takes along this pack on the back of her back, which has various symbolic and hydrological instruments and what have you. And the one on the right is one of her hydrolibros, which are, this one's called Receding, S-E-E and then C-E-D. And so this would go back into the creek and seed along the way.